Last night was a rough watch because for the first time in a while, the White Sox were not competitive. Let's discuss the Southsiders going from being disappointing to pathetic on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor to SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. The Tigers jumped on the White Sox early and just crushed the Pale Hose, and I want to discuss how the club went from being disappointing to just pathetic in the first segment. Then owner Jerry Reinsdorf's hopes for a new stadium in the South Loop took a major hit. I want to discuss how the Chicago Fire's announcement impacts the team's effort to build a new park on the 78. And finally, I want to add something to the checklist of things I would like to see the rebuild yield, and that is players who can dominate division opponents. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Okay, so losing isn't a terrible thing this season, considering the White Sox organization sent the message they're rebuilding. So take away the season. And there's this troll that just keeps jumping into our comments on our community. Let's shut him down because, again, I'm not the one that's saying that wins and losses don't matter this season. The White Sox said that. They're the ones that didn't spend any money in the offseason. They're the ones that cut payroll. The general manager even said they're rebuilding, so take away the season. Because, again, in 2026, even though we have to wait and wait, it's a loaded draft class. And the one thing that the last rebuild, the White Sox didn't do a good enough job was losing enough. So, at the same point, though, I think I've made it clear, and I think a lot of fans, like me, should have at least the standard of just be competitive in these games. If you're going to go down fighting. You know, if you're going to lose because you got overmatched. You know, fun bad. And for the most part, the Sox actually have done that this season until last night. And even then, you could say the last 4 games. But man, did the White Sox get drilled by the Detroit Tigers. They lost 13-1 and were probably the worst defeats of the season. I mean, yes, they lost 10-0 to the Kansas City Royals at Kauffman Stadium. You know, they also got just absolutely demolished by Boston this year. I believe they've lost now 13 games by 5 or more runs. But I'm going to have to put $1 in the 2024 mention jar. Last year, they were constantly getting blown out and constantly getting shut out. So at least the one thing that you wanted to see this season was, can you just avoid that? Can you just avoid making it being torture? You know, can you at least have games that aren't officially over or unofficially over by the 4th inning like yesterday's game was? Because the Tigers basically came into right field and figuratively drank all the beer, kissed all the girls, and just stomped on your Chicago White Sox. I mean, they stomped in the private area. They gave them a swift kick in the you-know-what. And it was just pathetic. And why do I point this out? Why do I tackle this when I've been preaching wins and losses don't matter? Is the Sox are on a streak of play where they went from being disappointing, because it was disappointing, that they didn't at least take 2 of 3 from the Orioles, that they were a get-right team. Because, again, one of the standards that you want to see this season is, can you, again, just not be a get-right team? And they were a get-right team for the Orioles. But they went from disappointing to straight up pathetic. I mean, that was one of the worst performances I've seen the White Sox. I think the only thing that was missing was your stereotypical base running gaffes and defensive errors. But when it came to the pitching and the hitting, and that was a rough watch. You know, at least this gig pays me to watch it. But for those that voluntarily watched it, wow, my hat's off to you. Because one piece of criteria I have alluded to in the past that everydayers have heard me say is, if you're going to lose, just don't look pathetic. Don't look feeble. And that's what happened. Jonathan Cannon, he turned in another clunker after getting roughed up by the Mets in his first start back from his back issue. that forced him to be scratched from last Saturday's start. He could only go 3 innings, 5 runs allowed, 3 walks, although he did have 5 strikeouts. But if he wasn't walking a guy or striking out a Tiger, he was giving up home runs as he allowed 3. And I'm going to get to Kerry Carpenter in the final segment. And guess what? He admitted after the game, the back tightness is still an issue. This is from Kyle Williams, Chicago Sun-Times beat reporter. He tweeted this out. For those watching on YouTube, I have the tweet up at Kyle_Williams Media. Jonathan Cannon said the back flares up on him when he's finishing his delivery. He was able to gut it through last week's start against the Mets. Quote, we'll assess in the coming days and see if we can figure out a solution. End quote, he said. Yeah, the solution is why are you asking him to pitch? Why is he pitching if his back is flaring up? First of all, again, what is with this organization having guys in their 20s have back problems? And then why are you asking him to pitch injured? I know the starting pitching depth is thin, but Cannon had a stretch before this back problem where he was pitching really good and was providing evidence that maybe he is the 5th starter on the next competitive team, or at least a long reliever, because he still just does not have that, basically, that elimination pitch. He just doesn't have a finishing move yet. Although he was showing that he could get strike 3, because he's very good at getting the first 2 strikes. It's getting strike 3. That's always been his problem. And during that little 4-game stretch that he had where he was looking really, really good, he was kind of showing that, hey, he made the adjustment to the adjustment. But, I mean, he's just been all over the place now. And he's someone that you can move forward with. His long-term prognosis is more important than getting you through some early games in a lost season in late May and early June. Honestly, I'd rather watch Bryce Wilson get roughed up for a few more starts if it means a 15-day IL stint for Cannon, gets him back to being healthy, and continues to provide data that he can help in the long run. And I just watched Wilson get roughed up in long relief last night. He got tagged for 8 runs and 12 hits. I mean, as I was watching this, I was like, I don't know how much more of this Bryce Wilson experiment I can take. But I can handle it if it means Cannon gets some rest, gets back to being healthy, and Wilson is willing to wear these terrible starts. I mean, my hat's off to you, though. I mean, the one thing you've got to give Wilson credit for is he took one for the team. I mean, I would love for Wilson, obviously, to be effective. I'd love to see him be a good long reliever like he was with the Milwaukee Brewers. But he's on the bad season train, folks. He's crossed over. It's just he's having a bad season. He's Dominic Leone, John Brebbia. That's what he is. But he was willing to keep going out there and take the hits and take the runs to save the bullpen. So props to him. I mean, that's a team player. You know, he was. He's like, okay, yeah, I'll just keep taking the ball. Because you got to remember, he's only on a 1-year, $1.5 million free agent contract. And he's trending into getting a minor league contract next offseason with a spring training invite. But it's just pathetic to ask an injured guy to go out there and pitch. And it's sad when the best pitcher for the Sox last night was Vinny Capra. You know, the offense was weak again. 5 hits. But hey, at least they avoided a shutout. And my hypothesis of a potentially potent lineup, yeah, let's just scrap that. I was wrong. It ain't happening. Although Chase Mydroth was the only hitter who showed up, collected 2 hits, a walk, and scored the only run. But the worry, and the other reason why I tackle this is, and I talked about it on yesterday's show, as everydayers probably heard, they're in a rough stretch of schedule right now. Tigers are in town for 3 more. Then in come the Royals for 3, and then off to Houston for 3. And the one hope this season is at least avoid these double-digit losing streaks, as I discussed yesterday. And with nights like last night, it only increases the chances of a potential losing streak turning out to be a long and rough one to endure. Well, in terms of losing streaks, Jerry Reinsdorf may have lost his hopes of a new ballpark on the vacant land in the South Loop known as the 78. The Chicago Fire just announced they are going to build a privately funded stadium there. Let's discuss how this impacts the Sox trying to get a park there next on Locked On White Sox. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 plus parts from over 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. and you need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. And I keep telling my brother-in-law, he's in the plumbing business. Tell your company to use Supply House because they have all these advantages they provide to the skilled trades. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. Again, that's SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. And today is definitely a venting episode. So, Jerry, this one goes out to Jerry Reinsdorf. I'm sure I don't know if he's ever listened to the show. I'm sure he has one of his minions, though, scouring the internet. So to one of these minions, if you can get this back to Jerry, if losing 13-1 to a division rival and being on pace to have a third straight losing season and completely botching the rollout of your owned regional sports network wasn't enough indication you are a terrible owner and you should just sell the team, now your dream of getting over $1 billion in taxpayer money to build your legacy stadium on the vacant land of the 78 is likely gone. Sell the team to the Ishbia brothers because they can afford probably to publicly finance their stadium, because the Chicago Fire's billionaire owner, Joe Montasudo, I think it is, or Suedo. I know I butchered his name. I'm sorry. He's announced plans to privately, keyword again, privately finance a $650 million, 22,000 seat soccer stadium. Again, privately finance the entire cost of a projected $650 million, 22,000 seat soccer stadium on the 78. He's going to cover the entire cost, where Jerry was reportedly only willing to kick in $200 million of a projected, I think the total cost was like $1.9 billion. So he was basically looking for like $1 billion to $1.7 billion in taxpayer money to build a new ballpark on the vacant land in the South Loop known as the 78. Not sure if this announcement obviously kills the Sox plan to still build on the site. I did reach out to Related Midwest for comment. The Sox, though, did tell WGN News they are still considering the 78, and this is per WGN.com. The Fire's proposal to build a new stadium on the 78 now raises questions about how the White Sox will proceed with their new stadium plans after the MLB franchise released renderings of a proposed new ballpark at the 78 in February 2024. Responding to an inquiry from WGN News, the White Sox said they're still considering the 78 as an option for a new ballpark. The site would presumably have room for both projects. Quote, Related Midwest first approached the White Sox about building a new ballpark on a piece of property they were developing, and we continue to consider that site as an option, a team spokesman said in the statement. We believe in a Related Midwest vision for the 78 and remain confident the riverfront location could serve as a home to both teams. We continue to have conversations with Related Midwest about the site's possibility and opportunities, end quote. Although, and the developer did say back in October they were open to both teams being on the 78. I mean, this isn't news that the Fire just suddenly popped out and said, ha, we took your deal just because we're privately financing. I mean, everydayers probably remember I did a show, I think, on this back in October. And the Sun-Times, in their reporting, is saying the soccer stadium will likely just take up 9 acres of land, and it's a 62-acre lot land. However, some of the reporting today hints the Sox, though, could be sunk at the 78. And if you look at the renderings, I mean, it's just basically one image, but if you look at one image, at least, that the Fire shared, I don't see a White Sox ballpark in there. I see a bunch of office space and condos and a lot of other buildings. So clearly the Fire are thinking, this is our thing. But again, at the end of the day, it is the Related Midwest is the developer. The Fire do not own the land. And again, I think you got to go back to, did I do the episode in September, October? Again, every day, as you'll remember, you got to go back to an episode I did of outlining who actually owns the land. It's not a great story there. But the one thing I'm just going to assume about this announcement is Jerry getting taxpayers to foot the bill on his dream ballpark. That's dead. That's done. It's got to be done because you got a fellow billionaire willing to cover the entire cost of his project. So it's kind of hard to say to the Illinois state legislature, give me $1 billion. Not much leverage to say, extend that hotel tax that was originally meant for me because, 40 years ago, I did actually threaten to leave and I had the power structure in place that were actually diehard White Sox fans. I couldn't be like, oh, we got to keep the White Sox. Keep extending that money because I think that's what Jerry thinks. He's like, well, all we're doing is just issuing new bonds. The hotel tax will pay for it, not really understanding that if hotels aren't being used like in the pandemic, guess who has to cover the cost of those bonds? You, the Illinois taxpayer. And it's also going to be really hard, I think, if you're Jerry, no matter how much of a shrewd businessman he is, how do you go and say, give me $1 billion when the guy, another fellow billionaire, again, is willing to cover the costs of his 22,000 seat stadium, outdraws you? Because like it or not, the Fire actually outdraw the White Sox right now. The Sun-Times reports the Fire draws 21,000. Sports Illustrated had the average draw at 26K back in May. Now, obviously, the crowds don't look great because they play at Soldier Field, 62,000 seat stadium, but it's going to be packed if they have a 22,000 seat stadium. You know what the Sox are drawing? 16K this season. 17K last season. Now, before Cubs fans, you jump in. We go when the White Sox are good. We're not just willy-nilly, we should just keep going because it's the place thing and it's the thing to do. No, we want to go watch good baseball. We'll go if it's a nice day outside too, but it's not like we're going to be like, hey, I'm just going to blindly, loyally go to the ballpark and hand over my hard-earned money. Okay? I did reach out to Rob Hart from WBBM. As you know, I've had him on the show a couple of times to talk about this. He hasn't heard much yet, though, on, again, what other details. He did, though, message me, hey, you got a lot of vacant land around the rate. Maybe the Ishbias might want to develop the land around the rate. He's not saying that that's their plan, but as everydayers have heard him say back, I think it was last month or two when I had him on the show, Bridgeport is a nice developing neighborhood. There are, and I shared the aerial on X, formerly Twitter, a lot of vacant land still around the rate, a lot of parking lots that could be developed that might be better in the long run to develop because that's a new revenue stream. You could actually make more from developing land around your ballpark than just charging for parking and having tailgating. I know we'd have to give up our tailgating, and this part of the Sun-Times piece written by Fran Spielman has me thinking, though, the Sox might have to pursue another site. This is the little chunk. The 78 has no such complications. At 62 acres stretching south to 16th Street, it's one of Chicago's largest undeveloped parcels and the most strategically located, but it has eluded development for decades. Once owned by convicted political power broker Tony Rezko, it's been under consideration for Amazon's Second World headquarters, a new corporate headquarters for United Airlines, for the home of JP Morgan Chase, and for Chicago Casino, now planned for the River West neighborhood. The push to locate those projects at the 78 never got past the drawing board. Neither did a plan to build a new White Sox ballpark at the 78 and perhaps even shoehorn in a dome stadium for the Bears on the same site. The University of Illinois' $300 million technology and research hub known as Discovery Partners Institute was once planned for the 78, but is now envisioned for the Illinois Quantum and Microelectrics Park on the site of the shuttered U.S. Steel Southworks plant. Those developments defeats created the opportunity that Masueto is seizing to realize, again, I know I butchered his name, is seizing to realize his longstanding dream of owning and controlling his own stadium. Quote, it's about investing in Chicago, not just a match on days, but every day as a committed community partner, end quote, Manasuta said in the ad published Tuesday. The 78's losing streak set the stage for developer and landowner Related Midwest and its CEO Kurt Bailey to take advantage of Manasuta's offer to build his own stadium. And then this is what Robert Shanek of the Chicago Tribune wrote. Over the years, the 78 has been in the running for everything from Amazon's second headquarters to a Chicago casino, but time and again, Related was unable to land the elusive anchor tenant to catalyze the mega development. Last year, the White Sox proposed a new publicly funded stadium at the 78, but Springfield lawmakers balked at the idea of contributing a reported $1 billion to build it. That's when the fire stepped up. Quote, "We've always believed in this location and our ability to build something great. We just needed a partner," said Kurt Bailey, president of Related Midwest. "All of our preparation, all of our work, all of our disappointment got us to the perfect place where we met with Joe and the fire, and it is a great match," end quote. So again, back though in October of 2024, when the fire did come out and say there was, when they were looking at Related Midwest did say, this is what they said. Given its proximity to downtown, adjacencies of the river, and flexibility to accommodate a wide range of uses, the 78 stands alone in its ability to house large institutions that want to plant their flag in the heart of Chicago. We are actively exploring the co-location of dual stadiums for the Chicago White Sox and Chicago Fire, two organizations whose presence at the 78 would align with our vision of creating Chicago's next great neighborhood, end quote. Hence why it's called the 78. But if he's going to build his second stadium, his other stadium, the White Sox are going to build the stadium on the 78 and you're going to have two stadiums, Jerry's going to probably now have to foot pretty much the entire bill. And I'm not sure he's willing to do that. And if only the White Sox had wealthy billionaires interested in buying majority stake of the team and controlling interest of the team. Oh, wait, they do. The Ishbert brothers have enough wealth to easily foot the bill, their side of the bill. Because I don't think, the CEO and the founder of Morningstar has enough money to finance both projects. Although he does have a lot of money. And I'm not sure, though, Justin Ishbia and the founder of Morningstar would align. But hey, if there's money to be made, you make peace. And the Ishbias could choose to also foot the bill at building Comiskeyville. Because again, the rate is still a very viable ballpark. Once they eventually take control of the team. You also do have the Reese Hospital site that could be developed. Soldier Field could use a tenant. No, I'm not saying that they would play at Soldier Field, but you could maybe redevelop the land once the Bears and the Fire leave Soldier Field. Although that just might be a headache because you got Friends of the Park that that basically was even saying there's no way the Bears were even going to be able to develop the south lot of Soldier Field because how they wanted to stay technically downtown and turn Soldier Field more into a park and then build their dome stadium. They were adamant. So I just think that that's a huge, huge headache. Arlington Heights has offered the Sox to join the Bears, although I don't think the Sox moving to the suburbs might not be a great move. But the Sox still have options. So, if you're also saying, well, they're off to Nashville. Yes, the dark cloud of the team moving remains, but it's just a dark cloud. I mean, I'm not going to stick my head and say it's not a possibility, but again, I don't think the Sox relocating will be broached unless every card has been played and it's the last card to play. And even then, I don't think Major League Baseball lets the White Sox leave until they've decided their expansion. So that it's a long ways away. But one option that I do feel is exhausted is the public putting up any money beyond, say, infrastructure costs to help the White Sox. Switching back to baseball on the field, one option I would like to see this rebuild yield is a hitter or two that strikes the fear into the hearts of the division, because you can add Kerry Carpenter to the list of White Sox killers. And let's discuss after the break. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. And I know my wife, she was getting stressed out tracking all of our expenses, but no more. Since we started using Monarch Money, we've been using it to make sure we can watch where we can cut on spending things that we don't need and plan out saving for retirement, which for us is coming sooner than we think. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode and recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. All right, so circling back to last night's debacle, and I know we probably shouldn't be revisiting this ever again, But a big reason for the 13-1 defeat was Kerry Carpenter just crushing the ball. I mean, the lefty DH pounded out 3 home runs last night, and I think you can officially add him to the list of Sox killers. So he's hit 6 home runs against the Sox this season, has a .316 average against the Pal host pitchers with a 1.579 OPS this year. Yep, that's a White Sox killer. So let me see. By my count, he joins Byron Buxton, Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, Jose Ramirez, and Steven Kwan. So now we got 6 White Sox killers actively playing in the division. And yet the White Sox don't really have a guy that just makes the rest of the AL Central dread facing them. They just don't have that guy right now. Luis Robert Jr. may have been that guy. That ship has sailed. And basically the Sox lineup has been get right lately. So add not only developing a couple of superstars to the list of the things this rebuild needs to produce, but maybe also superstars that can kill the division. Maybe 2 or 3 of those guys. That'd be nice. Because remember, even though you don't play the division as much as you used to, it's still 13 games each against 4 opponents, 52 games. That do help you get towards the playoffs, towards making it. And the White Sox have been helping division foes like the Royals and the Tigers get to the playoffs lately. You know, and it's been done in part because guys like Witt Jr. or Ramirez absolutely own Sox pitching. And now Kerry Carpenter does too. It's to the point that why even pitch to Kerry Carpenter? Why are they pitching to him? I mean, unless you absolutely have to. I understand that. I mean, I get trying to find any possible way to get Witt Jr. or Buxton out since they can still cause a lot of trouble on the base pass. But why are we pitching to guys like Kerry Carpenter, Ramirez, or Perez? Why? It's not like these guys are then also going to cause a ton of damage on the base paths. And all they do is crush Sox pitching, no matter who gets thrown out there. And also I'll add Steven Kwan. That's another guy that maybe you should still try to figure out. Can you throw a couple junk balls to maybe induce a grounder? I get like those are guys that you just don't want to give free passes. But Carpenter, Ramirez, Perez, and Carpenter can also run a little bit better, but still, they're just crushing you. Give them 4 pitches, get them on the base. I don't care. I mean, it was Kerry Bonds out there. And I would love Brandon Montgomery, Edgar Carroll, or Kyle Teal to develop into that type of Central Division killer. And maybe Chase Maedra turns into racking up hits much like Kwan does with the White Sox. I mean, obviously you want this, you want the team to develop hitters that mash the entire league. But the game within the game, you would like some guys to wreak havoc on the AL Central, and they just don't have those guys. And notice the guys, too, that I've mentioned are core guys for the division foes. So one thing you would like to see out of this rebuild is core guys, but then core guys who absolutely destroy the AL Central. And maybe I should have mentioned Colson Montgomery. Just not ready yet to re-add him to a core guy. I want to see if this swing adjustment proves it can yield results for maybe another month. And I would say once he does come back from this knee issue, he did take a pitch off his knee, so I can't put that on him getting hurt. If he continues to hit well, even if it's just making good contact and putting the ball, hitting singles and doubles, bring him up in July because the Sox need guys that can hit at some point. I mean, obviously you want to see him crush the ball, and that's the only way that I think you could live with his home runs. But even then, if he does have a good month, I'll add him back to the list and then be like, hey, can you develop into a division killer? But back to the checklist. Let's get some hitters developed that can be 2 to 6 F4 players with the added bonus of putting some fear into the Tigers, Royals, Twins, and Guardians. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And I'll be back tomorrow with a Way Back Wednesday segment going over what I wanted to tackle today, and that is a trade the White Sox made that was terrible, but it wasn't the Fernando Tatis deal. I want to go actually over that. I think that this deal that I want to discuss, I think that's the one that's actually even worse than trading away Fernando Tatis. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding the White Sox pathetic loss last night. The Chicago Fire now making it likely nearly impossible for Jerry Reinsdorf to get public money for his hopes of a new stadium on the 78, and the rebuild hopefully yielding a division killer. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.